you everyone for joining the webinar today. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Bill.
Great. Thanks, Michelle, and welcome everyone. And I hope everybody's having a great afternoon. And welcome to our monthly HBK Risk Advisory Series webinar. My name is Bill Heaven. I'm a Senior Director with HBK in our Risk Advisory Service practice. And this afternoon, I believe we have what should be a very interesting topic. I want to talk about cybersecurity hygiene. All right. So up on the screen now, you can see our agenda, and that's what we'll go through today. And I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping issues right now. First, our presentation is eligible for 1 hour of CPE credit. In order to obtain the CPE credit, you'll need to remain online for the entire presentation and answer the 4 questions that'll come up throughout the presentation. And then actually the 4th question that you'll answer is to say whether you want CPE or not. And then by answering that you want CPE, we'll just automatically generate you a certificate and email that to you. You'll notice in some of the questions today, and even if you're not looking for CPE, we would ask to that you answer the questionnaire, because some of them are just we're trying to get some information from you, and we're going to send out a separate seminar or survey, but just to try to figure out what days people would like to see a webinar, what time of day they would like to see a webinar. So when those CPE questions come up, even if you don't want CPE, there's a couple of them that are more tainted or tilted for the trying to figure out when the best scheduling time for this is. Also, we've muted all the incoming lines. If you're having any issues with the webinar itself, we are monitoring our chat window, and so you can let us know if you're having difficulty hearing us or something like that. And then we're going to plan on leaving a couple minutes at the end of the webinar to answer questions that come in. So you can send the questions into our monitor at any time. And additionally, in the meeting center there is a copy of today's slide deck in a PDF version that you can download. And then lastly, we will be sending out the slide deck and a copy to the recording afterwards, which should come out in the next day or so. So here are our learning objectives. So this is part of our CPE requirement to this is what we want to cover today. The attendees of the webinar this will be their takeaway that from attending the webinar. So you've already seen those as far as the invite, so I'm not going to read them. This is, again, I'm with HBK. I'm a Senior Director in our IT group. I've been with HBK since 2018, and I have basically a split role. So the majority of the time I spend on internal tasks of working in IT security within the firm. Additionally, I do work with clients and do some external client-facing work. So kind of a dual role, but if you have any questions on cybersecurity or anything, please feel free to reach out to me. All right, so let's dig into the background regarding cybersecurity hygiene and get going on today's presentation. All right, so for starters, these are the 5 subtopics that we're gonna cover regarding cyber hygiene, and I just tried to group these into subsets that seem to make sense, and we'll talk about the changing footprint, insider threats, credential theft, infrastructure oversights, and then how to prevent a business interruption. So again, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to send those to our monitor, and we'll queue those up and address them at the end. So let's talk a little bit specifically about changes to the IT footprint. So I put 4 things up on the screen here, and I think these are all culprits as to why our IT footprint has been changing. First and foremost, when I went back and started looking at some of the dates, I was a little bit surprised that it's been as long as it's been. But COVID-19 and the lockdowns and everything are a big contributor to why the IT footprint changed, because everybody went from working in an office to working remotely, working at home, and we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary of the famous 15 days to stop the spread, which I was shocked to find out that was actually March 16th of 2020. So just shy of 2 years of that, but that's a big contributing factor to the footprint changes. Additionally, the use of cloud computing is really growing, and people are migrating to the cloud. It's reported that 88%, I should say, of organizations use the cloud in some form or fashion. Additionally, work from home grew. This is, I was a little bit surprised at the stats I saw here that work from home 5 days a week grew from 17% to 44% during 2020. I was a little shocked that it was only 17% to start from, because of being 2020 was the start of the lockdowns, when you would think everybody that could would be working from home. So that surprised me a little bit. And then lastly, there's a lot of shadow IT. And what I mean when I say shadow IT, that's IT solutions that, number one, your IT department or group does not know about, and that you haven't involved them in the decision. So it's kind of like, it kind of goes along with the migration to the cloud, that people are able to basically bring solutions into your environment without going through IT, and because it's basically a cloud solution, they can work with that provider and do something to make their daily job hopefully easier. But it's stuff that you're not running through normal channels, and people may not be aware of. So that's typically what we mean when we talk about shadow IT. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about insider threats. So mainly I'd like to talk about two categories here, basically conscious and unconscious, and then security awareness training. So on the first one, you're going to have conscious would be that conscious is things that you're going to have attrition. People are naturally going to leave the organization. You're going to have disgruntled employees, which would also be considered a conscious category of people that are leaving. Then you have your unconscious thing, which is just secure social engineering, security awareness type things, and mistakes. So phishing campaigns, for example, people make mistakes every day and click on those emails when they're not supposed to. So that's what I'm categorizing as like an unconscious insider threat. Basically, you have to be in tune with something called IAM, or Identity Access Management. And it's just basically the processes and procedures of giving people access to your systems. And so when you have these, especially conscious changes, you want to make sure those people are removed from having access to the systems that they used to have access to as quickly as possible. Specifically talking a little bit more about the security awareness training or social engineering, they go hand in hand. So when I was doing research for this presentation, I went out to the ISACA site, which is basically it's a IT controls group, Information Systems Access and Control Association is what ISACA stands for. But I was surprised to find out some of these stats that I'll go through with you, and it's of breaches for a cyber breach where they're going to come in and compromise a system is 32% of that involve phishing. So phishing is a big deal out there. Ransomware, which everybody keeps hearing about ransomware, and it's been on the rise. We'll get to see latest stats when the Verizon data breach report comes out in May, and I'll do a webinar on that in May. But 85% of ransomware attacks use phishing as their entry point, and then malware or viruses, 94% of them are delivered via email, which again, so it's back on these. It's a big deal. A lot of stuff's getting into our environments through email in some way, whether it's a phishing email or just a hacker type email where they're not even trying to hide who they are. They're just sending malware in, and people are clicking on the link because they just love to click on links. Specifically about phishing, if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about they try to create a sense of urgency. So it was interesting when I was putting this presentation together, some of the subject lines. And again, I'll use some of the common subject lines that have been working lately, but keep in mind that these are a little bit time sensitive because as we're constantly changing with COVID, which the Omicron was, we were having high caseloads, and all of a sudden the caseloads are down. So, the COVID's changing a little bit. So consequently, the hackers are going to change their tact. But again, they're going to try to do a sense of urgency. But here's some recent email subject lines. And the subject line is, they're going to try to instill that sense of urgency and get you interested enough to open their email and then hopefully click on the link. But so if you got a subject line that said like stricter face mask policies beginning next week, that's something that's controversial and going to get you a sense of urgency, and people will probably click on that. Just like work from home ending next week, or everybody required to return to work in the office next week. So those are, again, some of the subject lines that we're working on the phishing emails as reported in when I was doing research for this webinar. All right, and then our next subtopic is credential theft. So again, social engineering, and then weak passwords. And again, what they're trying to do. And when I talk about credentials, I'm basically talking about your user ID and your password. You need to do everything you can to keep these protected. But I'm just talking about some of the social engineering type attack types. It's more than just phishing. Everybody's aware of phishing, where they send the phony email in to get you to click on it. There's also what's called vishing and smishing, which vishing is basically involving the phone, where they're going to basically call and leave you a voicemail. Smishing is a spin-off on text messaging, because a text message is also known as a SMS message. So those come and go as far as what I can tell on my just monitoring things in my personal life. It seems like around the holidays, you get a lot of stuff from Costco or Home Depot or whatever on your phone. Like click this text message to answer a survey from your recent purchase. And again, you just have to understand that it's just a numbers game with these hackers. They're making it from Costco or from Home Depot because they're playing the odds that a lot of people go to Home Depot or Costco to do their shopping, and they may just click on it. And text messages seem to work more, well during the holiday season. So it seems like that's when I get a lot of those phony text smishing type attacks. But they could come in anywhere. I've often get a message from my daughter that says like, "Hey, AT&T's asking me why I didn't pay my cell phone bill," and so, which is, at least she asked, but it's odd because she doesn't pay the cell phone bill anyway. Her parents do, but at least she's thinking about it, not just clicking on it. But And another type of social engineering attack would be pretexting. Pretexting is just another name for like scripts or like acting. So it's like it's a pre-established script. So it could be something like there's a exterminator coming in the office and they work through things like what they'll say. Could be the cable guy or the printer or copier repairman. You could have something called baiting, where they're going to try to bait you with something free. Could be like a free gift card. You often see those emails where they're trying to get you. You got a free Amazon gift card. Click here to claim it. Tailgating or piggybacking is basically what it's referred to when people kind of have a locked door, and maybe in the back of your office is a locked door where you have to have an access key or card key to get in, and people will try to follow you in and hope that you don't recognize that they're not even an employee, and just hope that you think they're a new employee or something. They'll follow you in. Then you have like an attack called a quid pro quo, which you hear a lot, but it's just basically I'm going to do something for you. So you could get contacted internally, pretending it's your like IT group, saying like, hey, we're having a system problem, so we'll get it fixed for you right away so it doesn't impact you, but I need you to give me your user ID and password to do that. So it's that kind of works out, as just a way that people fall for that a lot. So be careful of that. And then just generally, they're able to get credentials just because people use weak passwords and they reuse user IDs all over the place. And they, I didn't print out like the common passwords of 2021 or what's going on so far this year, but I'll do that in a later webinar. But I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that password 123 or password 123, some version of numbers counting, is going to be on the top of the list. So you want to try to be cognizant of that. People are using your weak passwords or your bad habits to be able to steal your credentials. All right, so then infrastructure oversights. You've got legacy applications out there so everybody probably has an example from their organization where you had an old piece of software and you needed to replace it because it just was too outdated. But so the thing that often happens is, all right, the replacement's been made, but sometimes people forget to decommission that asset. So it's still out there and everybody still has access to that. And the bad thing is that it's usually left up and running because people you haven't figured out how to port all the data from the old system to the new system, even if you're like moving to the cloud or something. And so you need to be able to, or else you move to the cloud and you started on January 1st, new data goes in there, but last year and beyond data is still in the old thing. So you keep it up and running, and then you don't patch it and you don't remember who has access to it and can get in there, and hackers can, find a way around and get that data from you and expose you to some type of breach or regulatory mishap. And then misplaced authority or responsibilities. So two things there which you got to be cognizant of. Don't give too many people admin access, because you want to restrict that as much as possible. Know who has those privileged IDs. And then as far as responsibilities, like for example, patching. Who's responsible for patching when you move to the cloud? Who's responsible for security when you've moved to the cloud? A lot of times you get that old adage. I probably should have put the picture up with like the person pointing his left arm to the right and right arm to the left, and say it's their responsibility, because everybody kind of just assumes it's somebody else's responsibility, and that often leads to a lot of misfortunes and breaches. And then our last topic on background, and I'll revisit these 5 topics in the next 2 sections and talk about some of the risks and then some of the things we can do to prevent the bad things from happening. But so if you talk about preventing a business interruption, your biggest things would be a business continuity. Some people refer to it as a disaster recovery plan, and your incident response. And you want to be able to make sure you're planned because just go with some of the stats from ISACA again, is 60% of small businesses go out of business due to a cyber attack. Pretty alarming number. 67% of companies with less than 1,000 employees have experienced some form of cyber attack. And then 22% of businesses that ended up being a victim of ransomware ended up going out of business. So that's a subset of that first one, that basically a third of companies that go out of business were because of ransomware. So it's a real thing. And then also you can prevent a business interruption, at least a long, lengthy one, because you have a backup. So you should always refer to your backup or think of your backup as a safety net. So you want to do everything you can to make sure that that backup is everything you expect and that it's working as you think it's working. And I'll talk more about that as we go on. And that will bring us up to our first CPU question. So I'll let you. Looks like we got something weird going on here, Michelle, with the question. It's got the poll shows the first question, and up on the slide it's showing the second question. So we want you to be answering the frequent cybersecurity attack vector right now. Or maybe that's just a display problem on my part. All right. Okay, so let's go on to the next agenda topic, and basically we're going to talk about some of the risks that are associated with those same 5 categories that I previously covered. All right, so changes to the footprint. So basically, like I was talking before, we have things with a lot more people are extending their environments because they work from home and then they're going to the cloud. But these risks are real because now you have a bigger. You don't have, in the older days, you had like your physical boundary, and then the boundary changed because of the internet, and now the boundary is changing again because of work from home and cloud, which kind of is the internet, but it's a little bit viewed differently. So you've got now you have, because of this increased footprint being larger and being more difficult to protect, because you've got personal devices in your environment now, where you have to worry about a personal device getting malware. Where are people logging into your network from? Are they using public Wi-Fi? Are they using their home internet? Additionally, you've got the cloud. Again, and I was talking about responsibility. Who's responsible for security? You've got third parties accessing your environment. You also have shadow IT, where you got people sending data outside of your environment. You're not even aware of it in all cases. So those just all turn into risks where you could end up experiencing an attack or having a loss of an IT function. Secondly, with all these strange work hours, especially with people working from home, you used to be able to pretty much say, if somebody's accessing our systems and it's not between, say, 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., you knew that something was up. But now, with the work from home, people may be, they may have to, take care of their kids when they get off the school bus from 3 to 5. So they're not on the system from 3 to 5, but then they end up being on the system from 10 till midnight or 10 till 1 in the morning after their kids go to bed, and then they get back in to finish what they had to do. So you've got some strange work hours. It makes it difficult to establish baseline. So your risk basically is you can't rely on the old patterns, and you could actually be exposing yourself to a breach and not be aware of it if you're not, properly looking at your baselines and trying to figure out who's accessing your network and when. And then again, I talked before about the confusion on the some of the security responsibilities. This is especially important in a cloud environment. And actually, a company I worked for before I came to HBK, very big cloud provider, and we're in the meeting and we're asking questions about, well, do you have all these security tools? And the answer was yes, they have them, but they basically said it's not our role to implement them. So if you want to use them, you have to turn them on yourselves. So again, you have to ask those questions and understand who's going to be doing this and be responsible for this, these processes. All right, moving on to insider threats. Again, we talked before about attrition and disgruntled. So one of the risks you really have to be worried about with internal threat or insider threats, I should say, is espionage, and I'm just grouping that in. So you've got some people that are inside your employee in your company, or you've got people that maybe they're disgruntled, maybe they're got some stuff going on, or maybe they're people that have just recently left. So you really need to take the time, and this is, you have to do the personal touch and figure out, keep in touch with your employees, because personal hardships could create motive for them to, do something illegal or try to work with a hacker. And one of the things I found out in preparing for today is that a lot of times I found an example of a hacking group that was offering, they will actually go out and hire ex-employees of ABC company if they want to try to attack ABC company, and they're throwing out some pretty amazing rewards, so to speak. But I saw one example where a hacking group was offering $1 million in Bitcoin for an ex-employee of an organization to help them get back inside to deploy ransomware to attack their system. And so their deal was, you help us successfully launch this ransomware and we'll give you $1 million in Bitcoin. So it's, you got the bad guys out there. It's not bad enough that they're bad, but then they're corrupting your, ex-employees and trying to bring them onto the scene, as well as, you've got risk with social engineering that I talked about before with those 6 different types of attack vectors. Talking a little bit more about credential theft, again with social engineering and weak passwords. So everybody probably remembers the Colonial Pipeline, which was coming up on, we're not quite a year, it was the spring of 2021, where they were basically shutting down all the refineries for the Colonial Pipeline and gas was short. Well, it ends up that what is believed to be the initiation of that cyber attack was through an ex-employee who, again, they still had access, their VPN was still up and running, and the password on it was very, very weak. So it wasn't hard to crack the password. So they got in through a pathway where it was a former employee using a weak password. So they were, doubly compromised and got in and was able to get their foothold to start that Colonial Pipeline breach. So that's a thing. And then also it was noted that Colonial Pipeline did not use dual factor or multi-factor authentication. I found a stat from Microsoft that, Microsoft now with their Office 365 accounts, they want everyone to use multi-factor. And they said that 99.9, so almost all of their sites that end up for their Office 365 that end up being compromised are as a result of not using multi-factor authentication. So again, anytime you can use multi-factor, it's recommended, and you need to understand what it's really doing is it's keeping you from that single point of failure. So if you do have a bad password, or you're using the password 1234, at least you get that second factor where you have to have something or something you have or something you are, so that you got two things going on before people can get access to something. It's a big deal, and it really helps if you can implement it and use it. And then talk a little bit more about the risks of infrastructure oversights. Again, I was talking about not decommissioning legacy applications. Again, the big risk is that you have people can get at old data that's really still could be PII type data, or expose you to a regulatory fine. But so you got to make sure you know where all your data is, what systems are still up, what systems should be decommissioned, who has access to them, and misplaced authority. So basically, a lot of companies will set up users on their systems for admin access, which gives you the ability to install software and or change system permissions. So it's really, if you can limit the number of admins you have out there, you're going to be better off. Sometimes referred to as privileged user IDs. Again, and it's a lot of times it happens because just people are, number one, sometimes they don't know any better. Sometimes it's just an oversight. Sometimes the software that's running on your system maybe wasn't written that well, and it requires admin rights. But if you give somebody admin rights and they really don't need it, when hackers get in on your system, a lot of times they lay dormant and just do a lot of research and figure out what they can do. It's called moving laterally until they can move vertically. And so if they know that they have an admin type ID, they can just, look around in your systems and move laterally until they can find what systems are within your IT environment, and then change permissions to get them more access and move around. So it really causes a lot of problems. And if you don't have to have people have admin access, then I would recommend that you shut that down. As well, again, as some of the risks of not sorting out the responsibilities is patching, for one example. And I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but 33% of breaches were a result of unpatched vulnerabilities. And again, if you've heard me talk before, you'll know that the bad guys actually go out and do these vulnerability scans, and they try to figure out what vulnerabilities your systems are susceptible to, and then they'll attack based on that. A lot of breaches happen after the patches were released, but people don't implement them quickly. There was if you remember the big ransomware attacks back in the summer of 2017. Actually, that was the one that's called NotPetya, and then there was actually a couple months before it was a Petya malware, where it went out and did a lot of encrypting of data on a ransomware attack. And those malware / ransomware attacks went after vulnerabilities that had been released well over a year ago and patched by Microsoft. But people, although the patch was out there, people didn't implement it, so they still became victims of that malware attack. Then I already talked before about preventing the business interruption. Some of the risks of not having a business continuity plan or incident response plan. Again, where you got a lot of businesses that either are a victim of ransomware or go out of business because of a breach or experience a cyber attack. And then on the backup, the big risk on the backups is that, especially ransomware, that it's going to be able to get to your backup and ruin your backup. So I'll talk about this a little bit more on how to make sure that your backups work and that you have to be testing pretty frequently so that you don't have one of those really bad days when you do get hit with ransomware, think you're going to go to your backup tape and you find that your backup tape or backup system isn't any good. So I left this slide in because this is, we actually, if you attended our webinar last month with Damon Hacker on vulnerability management and the Log4j vulnerability, this seemed to be interesting and made sense to what we were working on in today's webinar, with the number of breaches, how they're increasing, how 1 in 5, a lot of organizations are experiencing breaches. We've got $3 trillion of global impact, 7.5 months when I said that they lay low on your system and try to figure out how to move horizontally to be able to move vertically. They're on your system for 7.5 months before you figure out that they're there. And then just the number of records that are exposed and all the regulatory compliance that could impact you with is eye-opening in my opinion. All right, let's go to our second checkpoint question now. Okay, so again, thanks for, hopefully everybody answered that question, even if they don't want the CPU, so we can try to, again, we're going to try to do what our audience wants to see, because we had some comments that the lunchtime webinars were kind of inconvenient for a number of people, so we're just trying to figure out what works best, and we are going to send out a survey with some few more questions just to try to figure out what we've got good comments on the webinars themselves, but we're just trying to figure out, what makes most sense for people and their schedules. So let's talk about suggestions or best practices, sometimes referred to, of controls we can put into place to mitigate the risk that we just spent first part of the webinar talking about. All right, so again, with we've discussed how the IT footprint is expanding and why it's expanding. But so what you need to know is like where all your data is. Again, is it in the cloud? Is it in third-party sites? Do you have shadow IT that you're not aware of? So these are big suggestions here that can help you get that under control. Also, you might want to consider, performing risk assessments on your vendors, to figure out what type of information they're going to have access to and where they're going to store it and how it's going to get there and what they're going to do with it. That's probably a good topic for an upcoming webinar, because that can get pretty expansive, and we're doing a lot of pretty cool things here internally with vendor risk and trying to gauge that properly. And then the insider threats, again, we talked about, just attrition or people that were disgruntled. So basically, when you do have people leave, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, get rid of their system access, ASAP, and make sure if they had access to remote systems and make sure that goes away as well. And then what I talked about before about IAM or identity access management, if possible, link that directly to your HR systems. So when your HR system exits somebody, it automatically goes over through your IAM, whether it's Microsoft Active Directory or whatever, and goes out and takes away the access rights of that person, and AD as well, so that they can't access your system. And then we talked about the strange work hours, but if you can monitor your abnormal traffic, to form some kind of baselines, you can know what's going on, or have some ideas that you might have something suspicious going on there. Talking about misconfigurations or not patching, one thing you can do is you can make sure you're running regular vulnerability scans, and then make sure your patching process is up to date and you're patching things on a pretty regular basis. All right, for the increased credential theft, one thing, phishing campaigns do work. It's like sample phishing campaigns that you're doing in a controlled environment, so that if somebody falls for the fish, that it's just comes up and it gives them a message that says you shouldn't have clicked on that, but those really do work. And I work on things for clients and things. I see how many people click on these phishing test emails, and some people just, it's funny to say, but you'd think they were getting paid based on how many times they clicked emails, because they just click regardless of what it is. Secondarily, some of the controls are complex passwords. Those really do work, because keep in mind that these sophisticated hackers, they can do what's called a brute force attack, and they have computer software out there which is going to change all the numbers and letters and things and each of the characters of a password to try. If they can have enough time, they can crack any password. So that's why I like setting your system so if you have X number of invalid log attempts in a certain period, that you lock down the user ID, will kind of prevent people from using brute force attacks. But if the more combinations, the longer it will take them to hack or what's called crack your password. So complex passwords work. Password managers like a Dashlane or LastPass, or I think there's one called Pass1. So those are good options. Again, like I talked earlier, implementing a multi-factor authentication and giving more of the, basically getting rid of your single point of failure, and it's something something you have, or something you are. So that works. There's also something called adaptive multi-factor, which basically it uses some type of intelligence that's built in that knows, based on who you are or what type of access you have, that it basically makes your multi-factor that it's looking for to be a little bit more cognizant, so that it makes sure that it's picking a multi-factor factor that's going to make more sense based on the risk level that's exposed. Also could be doing extra checking for you based on the behavior that you're using. Like, are you going after some data that you never usually access? So maybe it makes the assumption that you're really not you, and it tries to make sure that it's real. Also could be looking to see if you're using an IP address that doesn't make sense. Maybe you're using an IP address from China or Russia, so maybe that's not you, or you're accessing software or data that you've never ever accessed before. So some of those adaptive things can benefit you there. And then the oversights of infrastructure, we talked about decommissioning software. Keep tabs on who has access to that. If you do have to keep data around because you couldn't migrate it over, do things to encrypt it so that it's unencrypted by software that's legit, that you're using in-house. But if it's not coming through a legit path, then it's encrypted and nobody can steal it. Make sure that the vulnerabilities, like the patching, talked about the Pecha virus that is happened because people didn't patch systems when patches were available. So it's, make sure that just because the system's been decommissioned, if you're not patching it, then it could be more vulnerable. And so operating systems have patches and updates, as so does application, as well as hardware and firmware. So you have to keep all three of those in mind. And then you can use complex passwords. A lot of legacy applications have passwords that are hard-coded within the software itself. So people, if they get access to your code, those passwords are in clear text. So if you can get rid of that stuff, that's going to make it more secure. Again, misplaced authority, keep track of how many privileged users you have, use logs to figure out who's logging in as a privileged user, and then restrict access as much as possible and keep track of what people are doing there and make sure who's responsible for what. You're going to have a much better success ratio. Preventing your business interruption. You're going to make sure you want to have some type of continuity plan. Include communications. And when I'm referring to communications, it's like you want to know who's responsible or who's able to talk to the media, for example. So say that you have an unfortunate event, where you have some type of a fire at your location. The news is going to want to come out, and they're going to be wanting to call everybody and say, hey, we know you work at company ABC, what happened? And you don't want the janitor or somebody that just joined the company, speaking on your behalf. You want to control who's able to speak to the media, and so you can control the message. Do this planning and analysis of what you need when you're in a low stress environment, meaning not in the middle of a disaster or some type of cyber event. So you want to make sure you figure out how to keep your business running efficiently, and make sure you write your plan down. You don't have to get too detailed, just keep it simple so you have a plan that you can go to, so that when you're stressing out, you have something to calm you down and go through it. And then make sure you test your plan and then regularly update it. People come, people go, software changes, so that you're going to make sure you keep it up to date. And then make sure you can get access to it. You don't want to have your disaster business continuity plan on your network share, but there was a flood in the bridge. There's only one way to your office, and the bridge is washed out. So you can't get to your office to get your disaster recovery plan. So make sure you plan ahead, and you have like multiple copies, stored in various locations so that you can get to it when you need it. When you talk about backups and backup strategies, there's a couple. Used to be when we're kind of migrating away from tapes. Some companies still use tapes, but it's moving away from it. There used to be the grandfather, father, son, where you had 3 generations, and you'd have one tape in the computer room, one tape. The son is in the computer room. The father is down the hall in a different locked room, and then the grandfather is off site, and you keep doing a rotation. So now they've moved to a new strategy, which is called the 3-2-1, where you have 3 copies of data. 2 are on different media, so that like maybe one's on a tape, the other one's backed up to the cloud, and then one version is always off site, so that you protect yourself that way. Another strategy that's talked about a lot is called air gapping or offline, which basically is just a fancy word to make sure it's disconnected and inaccessible from the internet. So basically what they're trying to do is, before I talked about ransomware. So ransomware, they really spend a lot of time now trying to figure out how to get to your backups, because people aren't paying the ransoms anymore because they always go like, well, I'll just go back to my backup. But what the ransomware industry, hacking industry, I should say, has done because of that is they said, all right, well, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to just steal some of your data, and then we're going to threaten to release it. And also, we're going to find your backup, and we're going to trash those copies so you can't rely on them. So that's another reason why you have to test your backups on a regular basis so that you know that they are good. Because one interesting stat is 65% of ransomware actually targets backup files now, so they can try to corrupt them. Also, not that it's recommended to pay the ransom, but some companies do decide to pay the ransom, and they kind of miscalculate on how long their business is going to be down, because they may have gigabytes worth of data, and all this data has been encrypted. So just because if the ransomware hacker has enough integrity to actually do what they say they're going to do, and you pay them the ransom and they actually give you the key to unencrypt your file, there's a time process that has to go there. Number one, if you're just unencrypting or decrypting the file based on the key and or going back to a backup tape, you have to understand how long that process is going to take, and it could be hours, could be half a day. So that you're going to want to keep that in mind when you're planning to keep your business up and running. And that takes us to another whole question. This again, even if you don't want the CPE, if you could answer it for us, we'd appreciate it. Okay, now let's move on and we'll just go into our wrap-up mode. We've got a little bit of time left here. So hopefully you found today's presentation valuable and somewhat interesting, and we'll wrap things up and move on to Q&A to see if any questions came in when we're online. And we'll do our last checkpoint question, CPE. So if you do want to get CPE, go ahead and answer yes to that question. All right, so now we're going to move on to the question and answer phase. So again, hopefully the presentation was interesting and you learned something about cybersecurity hygiene. And if you do have any questions, if we don't get to you, if your question came in, we'll respond to you. But if you have, my contact information is on the screen. So if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'll get back in touch with you. So Michelle, do we have any questions that came in? It looks like we have about 5 minutes. Well, it looks like we're right on target.
Yeah, we had a couple actually come in. The first one is, if I use the cloud, do I need to worry about security?
Actually, yes. Like I was talking before, you do need to be cognizant of not only implementing security, but whose responsibility it is to implement the security. I gave the example during the presentation where a company that I used to work for, we were evaluating whether we were going to work with this particular vendor who was a well-known web hosting company, and we asked questions about, do they have this type of security thing or that type of security thing, and the answer was yes, they did. But then so we were just ready to check the box there, and then they actually expounded on it and said, but we don't implement that. It's your responsibility to implement that. So Luckily for us, they went and got a little bit chatty at the end of our conversation, because just because they're a big known company doesn't mean that their security is, number one, is there, and number two, it's been implemented. So you want to make sure you cover those bases when moving some or part of your systems to the cloud.
A question that just came in that kind of piggybacks that question is, which cloud backup service do you recommend?
There's a lot of choices out there. I don't really have a favorite. I can say one of the ones that I run into a lot is it's called Veeam, VEEAM, I believe. That's a well-known one, and then you have the smaller ones, with like a Carbonite, or there's some other ones that are more like on a personal level. But really, you just basically have to look around to see what works best for your scenario, including the cost. But a lot of those, just understand what a lot of those backups are doing. And you want to make sure you understand, is it doing a full backup every night, or is it just doing one full backup and then it does what are called like incremental backups? It just keeps piling those on. So you just need to understand what the recipe is, so to speak, so you know what's going to happen if you're in the unfortunate situation where you have to rely on that backup, because you're most likely going to have to go to a full backup and then apply the delta, the changes, and do you have to go through one by one, or do you just do the full backup and the last incremental, or whatever it is? But it's hard for me to recommend just one, but there are a number of them out there. If you still have other questions, reach out to me by email, and I can help you identify some of the options out there and point you in the right direction. I'd be happy to do that. All right. Well, it looks like we're almost out of time here, and I don't think we have time for any more questions. So again, thank you for attending today's webinar. Hopefully it was informative. And as far as our save the date, as of right now, we're planning on our March webinar would be Wednesday, again at this afternoon time slot, trying to give people their lunch hour back. But again, we'll send the survey out. And so when we send our invite out, which we'll target for next week, we'll probably do the survey right before that, and then make sure everybody's clear on the time. But we will be doing a webinar next in March. We'll just to be determined on the actual day of the week and the time. But it's going to be probably the last week of the month, because we usually try to do things towards the end of the month so people can anticipate when there'll be a webinar. But again, thank you very much for attending, and hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day and has a good evening. Thanks for joining us today.